Welcome along to 98 Not Out, the cricket podcast. Remember, spread the word, tell your friends. The more subscribers, the better it gets. Today I'm talking to Richard Clarke, and we're talking about eyeballs on sport. Richard, good to have you along. I think we can both agree this is almost like peak cricket season with the county championship in full flight and the weather being great. We haven't had much in the way of weather interruptions. It's been fantastic so far.
It's my favorite time of the season in the sense that it's game after game. You've got whatever it is, six, seven, or eight, depending on the season, games sort of stacked up right at the start. The championship's absolutely the focus. You've got some great games going on, great finishes, and it's a red ball focus. And this is really the only time. Obviously, you've got September, but this is the time when the weather's good and there's optimism's high. Favorite time of the season by far.
Yeah, it really is. And some of the things that we've talked about before is it just ignites all the reasons why you love cricket. The spectacle of the red ball game, the toing and throwing, and also the social aspect, which always to me is very, very important. That you go there, you catch up with old friends, you meet, you even get involved in conversation with complete strangers about what's going on in the game. And to just pick up on one of them, and I know you've written about this just recently, is about people, how they, if they're not in the stadium, how do they watch the game? And there's the argument, which I think is getting a bit tired now, about getting it back on free-to-air TV for various reasons. I think we've talked about 100 times already on this program, is that it's just not going to happen. There's not enough bandwidth. There's too much competition. But more importantly, it's not how people, particularly the younger generation who we're trying to appeal to, don't watch or follow sport. Now, I picked up a really interesting thing. The World Snooker Championship was just finished at the Crucible in Sheffield. Now, the Crucible to snooker is akin to Lord's at the cricket. Now, Barry Hearn, who's, to his credit, has dragged snooker from being a smoky, above a pub sport to being the absolute spectacle that it is these days. Now, he's keen to move it away from the Crucible because it's too small and he wants to have snooker played in front of large crowds. I think it's a mistake because snooker is all about being intimate and the tension that a smaller venue offers, apart from the whole traditions that I've just sort of mentioned. But what I found was interesting. Now, we've had a Chinese winner for the first time ever. In fact, the first Asian winner of the tournament. And what was interesting was some of the stream figures. So Huya Stream 1 picked up 2.24 million viewers. The second stream for that player picked up 106,000 viewers. The third stream, 1.75 million viewers. And for Xiao Gudong's live stream, 1.95 million viewers. And Shi Chungji's stream, 3.65 million viewers. So that tells me how people are consuming sport these days. Michael Vaughan said recently that he thinks watching on TV is a thing of the past now. Everyone accesses sport via their laptop or via their phone, via TikTok or via YouTube. Now, you've just written about one of the standout things of the current county championship is the amount that are watching, the growing figures on YouTube. Do you just want to just expand on that a little bit?
Yes, it came about because of the end of the last round of championship games, and Derbyshire and Glamorgan, that was a tight finish, and Middlesex were playing Kent, that was a very, very tight finish. And of course, we all know, and I sort of send out a klaxon on social media to say, look, there's a tight finish, get on the streams. We all know where to go if it's going to be a tight finish. And regularly when that happens, it's 10, 11,000 people on. And that is with no mechanism to alert anybody. That is purely organic. You get 10,000 people on these streams coming. They're obviously looking at the scores via Quick Info or BBC website or BBC app or whatever it is. And then when it gets tight, they switch over. That's great attention. That is behavioural change, and that's really hard to do. and it's organic. We should be really building on that. And I've heard the argument, as you said, that we should try and get cricket back on terrestrial TV. Of course, most people there are not talking about the Championship anyway. They're talking about the Sunday League. There's a huge romance about the Sunday League, Sunday Grandstand, blah blah blah. And I get that, and I did absolutely love that. The world's moved on. It's a ridiculous situation in a sense that now we can see video coverage, online streaming coverage of Championship games and the women's games, and we get clips or even the streams of the second team games. This is manna from heaven. We never used to get this. But
even club games too.
Yeah, even club games. Yeah, I mean they've. And I think I'm right in saying the ECB have been quite proactive in this, and some of the boxes that you're able to stream games on. This is all great, absolutely great. And one of the great things is the clips. The clips is great. My point is this: we don't need a TV deal. YouTube is now television. I'm looking at a major report from Nielsen, who are big in this area, and it's from July last year. And in the US, streaming on television, YouTube was 10.4% of the market. Netflix was 8.4. Amazon Prime was 3.4. So we are very used to getting YouTube through the telly. My father-in-law, who's in his 80s now, when Lancashire are playing, he can get it through his laptop. He knows how to do it. And of course, no problem with my kids. So this is cross-generational. If you look at some of the audience figures from the YouTube streams, they're very, very young indeed. Very, very young. I think Warwickshire had some figures. They put out some figures of the streams. And it means if you're covering games in their longest form, then you could clip them down into highlights, and highlights are now increasingly valuable in comparison to live rights, because young people don't want to watch full live games. They want to watch full live football games.
No.
Right? So highlights are relatively more valuable. They haven't overtaken by a long way, but they're relatively more valuable. And then you can also clip off the moments for TikTok, the moments of It's So Village or whatever it is, the things that we like to see, which are gateways in to seeing longer content. So these YouTube streams tremendously value. My biggest point that I was making yesterday is don't put them behind a wall in any way. Make it frictionless. I know it's costly. I know there is cost involved, but there is no media covering Championship cricket. You don't get scores in the newspapers anymore. You don't get daily county reports. Yes, some of the broadsheets do bits and bobs, but they're not doing that much. There is no way to get the game in the face of the world and young people. Okay, because yet again, if there's an Indian player playing, I would think there's going to be a lot of eyeballs on that player. So this is purely global. We can take over our own marketing and market our game the right way if we keep those streams free. And there's lots of mechanisms to create value out of those streams, getting data, getting some sort of registration if it were possible, growing your CRM, getting it sponsored, even getting donations, getting coffee tips. You ask me for 20 quid for the stream to the Essex stream, I will donate that. If it's a case of we want a donation, if you can't do it, don't do it, but it's important to keep this going, I'll donate. I'll be happy to do that, and I'm sure many people would as well, to keep that free and open and easy, because I want to be able to go to the Leicestershire game or the Derbyshire game or the Glamorgan game to see it when it's tight, because those games, when they get tight, that's fantastic sport. That Middlesex game was fantastic sport. The Glamorgan game last year, Glamorgan Gloucestershire, where it was tied, that was one of the sporting highlights of the year for me. And I want to be able to see it. So let's keep these streams free. It is critical for keeping county cricket, red ball cricket alive.
I think there's also a case for the ECB to lend a helping hand in a kind of an umbrella role. I've long argued for the need for a kind of a match of the day style highlights program. So in the evening or whenever after the play, and we're not talking about TV, we're talking about on YouTube. Go on, put on YouTube, in the same way that you have today at the test, today at the counties, and after the close of play, someone puts together a half-hour compilation of what's gone on around the county championship today, and then maybe at the end of it, you put a reel together of how the results unfolded. I think there's got to be a new way because, as you say, in the old days when we were kids, the broadsheets would be full of it. There'd be full reports and scorecards of everything. Even now in the big Sunday newspapers, you've got to scour through to find anything, even about cricket, let alone a scorecard or anything. YouTube, and as you say, keeping it free is definitely the way forward.
I used to work in Major League Soccer in America. I worked for one of the teams out there, and that was a situation where I went over in 2015 when the league was only 20 years old, and the clubs didn't have the staff, the wherewithal to cover the game in what was called then a new media way. So Major League Soccer Central, the central organization, the FA, for want of a better phrase, or the Premier League, I should say, they would give us a lot of the content. A lot of the content was centrally made. Had this been more planned, and by the way, as critical as I am of the ECB, they have been contributing in terms of infrastructure and reporters network and things like this. So they are doing things, absolutely. What I would say is that if they had more faith in the game and they hadn't had their resources elsewhere, not to go back into into that one, but if they had their resources and were building up the county game, there are huge economies of scale that could be made from a nationwide structure. But as it is, a lot of the counties, I think, are actually overspending, because there isn't a nationwide structure, and that could have huge positive effects in terms of sharing of content, getting clips out immediately, because immediacy is very important. For me, I would have an appointment just to get back to your digest show. I would put together a 10 o'clock nightly live show of an hour, maybe an hour, three-quarters of an hour, where I would have someone a little bit like the ESPN Sports Centre, where you could have literally, it's kind of today at the test, but today at the county ground.
Yeah.
But it would be live. It would be live, and it would have some of the correspondents, the commentators chipping in, discussing the day's play, and you could have your match of the day type show there, which, yet again, you make it in the long form and then you clip bits out to make it relevant in social. So you've got sort of one long form timeline literally on your timeline in terms of the way it's edited, and you clip bits out for TikTok, and you clip bits out for YouTube, you clip bits out for here, you clip bits out for there. And then, I mean, I did this when I worked in content at Arsenal. We would create a show, and then we'd do a Spanish version, we'd do a Chinese version, we'd do different versions of essentially the same news bulletin, but voiced a different way for a different market. Well, that's what we were trying to do. We didn't always do it, but we were trying to do that. Well, no, we did it a few times actually. It's labor intensive. It's hard to do, which is why you need those economies of scale from doing it across the county network. The other thing that's really critical is AI. AI here. I mean, if you've ever seen some of these green boxes that cover local games or even non-league games, they're VO cameras, and that's an automated camera for football, which is basically cutting, editing, acting as a producer, a switcher across the different cameras, and that's how non-league, lower non-league is covered these days. There is a lot. I mean, there's things called pixel cameras. There's a lot of technology comes out of it. Israel, actually, it's come out of Israel to do this, and I think it would have been really interesting to have, hindsight's a wonderful thing, but had we started now and realized how popular they could be, have a national network with a lot of semi-automated coverage, because I tell you what, we would get 80% of the quality of coverage at 50% of of the price, and that's worth having, given we're looking at whatever it is, 20, 30 grand a year to cover a league season, and that's costly. That's
Yeah,
costly
but
when they're
could you also
counting
just
football.
engage this huge community of YouTubers, people who are at a ground or people that are just making comment, make it more social, make it more interactive, more immersive.
I think there's also, I mean, yeah, and you're right, and I think we're torn between the BBC commentary, which I think is fantastic and better than the club commentary, because the club commentary by nature is a bit more biased, a bit more colloquial. The BBC commentary is fantastic, and of course that can't be monetized and commercialized in the same way, which is difficult. I think Somerset have got their own commentators, and I was looking at the game at the weekend, and they were putting a lot of their own adverts in, and of course you can engage a lot more with your audience and commercialize it because they have their own commentators, albeit that takes on greater cost. And from a neutral perspective, I enjoy the BBC commentators a lot more. So there is a problem there. I don't think it's insurmountable. It shouldn't be insurmountable, given that this is the only gig in town for county cricket, as far as I'm concerned. And I mean, and just one thing I want to say is the thing that it shouldn't be the likes of me saying there's a tight finish on, go to the streams. There should be an automated way of alerting people. I went to Major League Baseball 20 years ago, and Fantasy League is big. And they'd set up MLB BAM, Advanced Media, MLB Advanced Media. They'd set up a streaming service that linked with your fantasy team. So when your player was at bat, your coverage flicked to that player, and it was automated.
Wow.
Yeah, that's 20 years ago, right? And county cricket doesn't have a system where there's a tight finish going on, or blah blah's near his 100, or blah blah's near his 200, or blah blah, or the tail's wagging here. Why can't we direct the streams? You can have an automated stream which will curate your experience.
I get that. And I'm sort of thinking now, so what you do is you have your today at the county ground in the evening, which is a kind of a formalized, in the same way that match of the day is, you have the streams with the BBC commentary and it's all whatever else. And then you might have a panel in the studio. And then maybe you could interact that with illustrations from, oh, this is what it was like being at the stadium. This is what so-and-so who was there. This is the Grumbler, big Essex fan. He's on there, and kind of decorate the coverage with all of that, which would surely be the way to engage the wider audience.
Yeah, you could. I mean, I mean, this is what I do for a living, right? I'm a content consultant for a living. So, and I made TV shows and created TV shows, and I wasn't interested. Sorry, it wasn't television. It wasn't traditional television. It was TV online, as it were. So, we had a virtual reality studio that we got in at great expense sort of 15 years ago, and the amount that could be done there. I mean, another thing I always pitch to counties, and I think Lancashire have done this, but the studio that they've got there, that could be hired out to local businesses, right? So you could set up a virtual studio in your county ground, and during county games, that is used, and that is part of the TV coverage, etc. But outside of that, that's a TV studio for which you can create a revenue-raising business around for the locality, okay? Or you could even throw it into a sponsor and say, well, here's your sponsorship deal, but for a little bit more, we'll make you a few adverts using our players. By the way, we've got a studio. That's added value. That's positive, right? And also, you could literally, if you've got a TV studio and you've got a small crew that can run it. I mean, literally, when I've done this before, we went from a traditional TV production studio with 15 people to a virtual TV studio with 5 people making 4 hours of live internet content, effectively TV content, which went on the internet, and we reduced our costs by more than 60-70%. This can be done. It does take investment, and it does take a will, and the emphasis isn't there at the moment from the ECB, and they need to be heavily involved. But as I say, they have been supportive in many ways in this area.
Well, if you, the listener, think this is a good idea, and or maybe if you think it's a bad idea, let us know in the comments. Get in touch with 98 Not Out. But it can only be a good thing, and it shouldn't be too hard. The tools are there. We just need a bit of momentum being built up. So, if you want to be part of a campaign to try and do this, and I'm sure Richard and I would be more than happy to drive it and get it in front of people that we might think would be interested and might have a bit of skin in the game, get in touch. Richard, great to have you on the program as always. Very, very thought provoking. And yes, let's get this far and wide, and let's encourage people to use AI to alert people when things are going on, and let's have today at the county ground.